Experimental or theoretical? Ano nga ba ang pagkakaiba nito? Yan ang pag-uusapan natin ngayon dito sa ating matsayang talakayan. Kaya, stay tuned! Hello, Grade 8 learners! Welcome back to our channel. For today's video, we will discuss experimental and theoretical probability. With the learning competency, illustrates an experimental probability and a theoretical probability. Let us recall the previous lesson. Probability is a measure of how probable it is that an event will occur. So in the probability of event, it is number between 0 and 1 that indicates the likelihood the event will occur. So ibig sabihin, if the probability is equal to 0, then the event will not occur. Ibig sabihin, it will not happen. That is what we call impossible event. If the probability is equal to 1/2, or in decimal that is 0.5, or in percent that is 50%, the event is equally likely to occur or not occur. Ibig sabihin, this is 50-50. So, it is possible na 50% mangyayari or 50% ay hindi mangyayari. And then we have, if the probability is 1, the event is certain to occur. Ibig sabihin, you are sure na mangyayari yung event na yon. We also discussed the probability of simple event. In solving the probability of simple event, we use the formula P of event is equal to the number of favorable outcome over the number of possible outcome. For example, a jar contains 10 red marbles, 8 blue marbles, and 2 green marbles. Find the probability of getting a blue marble. So using the formula, the probability of getting a blue marble is equal to the number of favorable outcome over the number of possible outcome. Okay, so how many possible outcomes do we have? Correct. So we have 20 possible outcomes since there are 10 red marbles, 8 blue marbles, and 2 green marbles. Okay, how many blue marbles do we have? Correct. So there are 8 blue marbles. So therefore, in getting the probability of blue marble is equal to 8 over 20, or that is equivalent to 2/5. Now, there are two types of probability: the theoretical probability and experimental probability. Getting the probability of an event is also known as the theoretical probability. Let us discuss further the theoretical probability. The theoretical probability of an event is the ratio of the number of ways the event can occur to the total number of equally likely outcomes. Pag sinabi nating number of ways the event can occur, so this is the same as also with favorable outcomes. Pag sinabi naman natin na total number of equally likely outcomes, these are the total number of possible outcomes. So we can represent in the formula, probability of event is equal to number of favorable outcomes over the number of possible outcomes. So since sinabi natin kanina that theoretical probability is also the same with probability of simple event. We can also use this symbol. What does N of E means and N of S? Okay, so the probability of event is equal to the number of ways the event can occur over the total number of possible outcomes. Let us have our example. A spinner is divided into 8 equal sectors, numbered 1 through 8. First question, what is the probability of spinning an odd number? So using the given formula, let us identify the number of ways the event can occur and the total number of possible outcomes. So ilan ang total number of possible outcomes natin? So we have 8 because the spinner is numbered from 1 through 8. And number of ways the event can occur. So ilan ba ang odd numbers natin dyan? Ang odd numbers natin ay 1, 3, 5, and 7. So there are 4 odd numbers. So therefore, the probability of event is equal to 4 over 8, or in reduced form, we have 1/2. Question number 2. What is the probability of spinning a number divisible by 4? Okay, since we have 8 equal sectors numbered 1 through 8, so the total number of possible outcomes is 8. And how many numbers are divisible by 4? Okay, so we have there 8 and 4 are both divisible by 4. So there are 2 numbers. So therefore, the probability of spinning a number divisible by 4 is equal to 2 over 8, or that is equivalent to 1/4. Next, what is the probability of spinning a number less than 3? So again, since we have 8 equal sectors, we have there 8 possible outcomes. Now, what are the numbers less than 3? So we have 1 and 2. So there are 2 favorable outcomes that we have. So therefore, the probability of getting or spinning a number less than 3 is equal to 2 over 8, or equivalent to 1/4. Now that you know the theoretical probability, let's move on to experimental probability. Experimental probability is derived from a series of trials or experiments. The probabilities obtained from experimental probability may differ as we increase the number of trials. Ibig sabihin nito, every time that we actually do the experiment, yung number of possible outcomes will depend on the number of trials that we have. Experimental probability can be calculated by performing an experiment, conducting a survey, or looking at the history of the event. Meaning, before we can get the probability of an event using experimental probability, the actual performing of experiment should be done. The probability of an event is based on the actual result of an experiment. So we are going to use the formula. Probability of event is equal to the number of times event E occurred over the number of times the experiment is repeated. Let us consider the given example. Ang event natin is scoring a basket. We have there to use the formula number of baskets scored over the number of shots taken. So on the first trial, okay, hindi na-shoot yung bola. So number of baskets scored ay 0, at dahil yun ay first trial, yun yung unang shot natin, so we have 1. Kung gagawin natin ulit, this is our second trial. Dahil na-shoot ang bola, meron tayong 1 as number of baskets scored. And yung trial natin ay pangalawang trial, kaya meron ka ng 2 sa denominator. At ulitin pa natin. Okay, so hindi na-shoot yung bola on the third trial. So, number of baskets scored ay 1 pa rin, pero number of shots taken is 3 dahil pangatlong trial natin yun. And that is how we show the experimental probability. Next example. If we are going to toss a coin, let us tabulate the result. On the first toss, we have a tail. On the second toss, we have a tail. On the third toss, we have a tail. On the fourth toss, we have a head. On the fifth toss, we have a tail. On the sixth toss, we have a head. On the seventh toss, we have a tail. On the eighth toss, we have a head. On the ninth toss, we have a head. And for the last toss, we have a tail. Now that the results has been tabulated, what is now the probability of getting a head? Okay, so titingnan natin ilang head ang lumabas doon sa experiment natin. So that is number of times event H occurred. So there are 4 heads. Okay, and the number of times experiment is repeated is 10 because we tossed the coin 10 times. So therefore, the probability of getting a head is equal to 4/10 or 2/5. Or that is also equivalent to 40%. Another example. The spinner shows 6 equally sized slices. If you span 30 times and got the following results. When we span, it landed on red 5 times, orange 2 times, yellow 4 times, green 7 times, blue 8 times, purple 4 times. Now, compute the experimental probability of landing on yellow. So we have now to use the formula. Probability of event is equal to the number of times event E occurred over the number of times experiment is repeated. Since it is already stated in the problem that if you span 30 times, ibig sabihin 30 times natin na pinaikot o ginawa yung experiment. So, ibig sabihin, number of times experiment is repeated ay 30. Now, when we compute the experimental probability of landing on yellow, titingnan natin sa yellow. So, there are 4 times landed on yellow. So, therefore, we have there 4/30 or that is equivalent to 2/15. Now, let us compute the experimental probability of landing on orange. Using our formula, so we will identify the number of times event E occurred. So, tingnan natin yung orange. So, there are 2 times that event occurred. So, how about the number of times experiment is repeated? Okay, so since we span 30 times, so it is 30. So therefore, we have now 2/30 or that is equivalent to 1/15. Next, compute the experimental probability of landing on red. So using our formula, identify natin yung number of times that event occurred. Okay, so since ang hinahanap natin is landing on red, titingnan natin kung ilang beses nagland yung spinner doon sa color red. Okay, so based on the result, meron tayong 5. And the number of times we span is 30 times. So we have now 5 over 30, or that is equivalent to 1 over 6. Next, compute the experimental probability of landing on purple. So using our formula, identify natin yung number of times event occurred. Okay, since we are looking for the probability of landing on purple, so tingnan natin, we have 4 times that the spinner landed on purple. So yun yung number of times event occurred. And the number of times experiment is repeated, yun yung 30 times. So we have now the probability of landing on purple is 4 over 30, or that is equivalent to 2/5. Compute the experimental probability of landing on blue. Using our formula, so identify natin number of times that the spinner landed on blue. So meron tayong 8. And we did the experiment 30 times. So therefore, we have 8 over 30, or that is equivalent to 4 over 15. And lastly, compute the experimental probability of landing on green. So using our formula, number of times that landed on green, we have 7. Number of times the experiment is repeated, we have 30. So therefore, the probability of landing on green is 7 over 30. Ano nga ba ang pagkakaiba ng experimental at theoretical probability? In experimental probability, this is actually happen. Ito yung actual na result na lumabas based on the experiment or trials. Pag sinabi naman natin na theoretical probability, this should happen without performing any experiment or trials. So in experimental probability, we have our formula, number of times event occurred over number of times experiment is repeated. While in theoretical probability, that is number of favorable outcomes over the number of possible outcomes. So let's have our example in tossing a coin. When we do the experiment, tossing a coin 10 times. So we come up with 3 heads and 7 tails. Now, what is the probability of getting heads? Okay, so in probability of getting heads, we have 3 over 10. Dahil 3 times na lumabas yung head when we do the experiment tossing a coin 10 times. How about getting a tail? Yes, the probability of getting a tail is 7 over 10. And when we get the sum of the probability of heads and the probability of tail, that is equivalent to 1. Now, so let us see probability of event when we use the theoretical probability. So in tossing a coin, we come up with 1/2. Anong ibig sabihin nito? Favorable outcome is either head or tail. Since we are getting head, so isa lang na beses lalabas yung head over the total possible outcomes. Ano ba yung possible outcomes natin? Head and tail. That's why the probability of getting head is 1/2. And the probability of getting tail is also 1/2. So when we get the sum probability of head and probability of tail, that is also equivalent to 1. Another example. If you rolled a die 36 times, the following results are tabulated. What was the experimental probability of how many times an even number was actually rolled using the table? So tingnan natin ilang beses nag-land sa even number. Sa number 2, we have 3 times. Sa number 4, we have 6 times. Sa number 6, we have 6 times. So i-add lang natin yung frequency. 3 plus 6 plus 6 is equal to 15. So therefore, the probability of getting an even number based on the table is 15 over 36, or that is equivalent to 5 over 12. Now, so let us try theoretical probability. What is the theoretical probability that an even number will be rolled on a number cube? So let's have the faces of a die. So saan dyan ang mga even numbers? Ang even numbers natin ay 2, 4, and 6. So there are 3 favorable outcomes. At ilan faces ang meron tayo sa die? So there are 6 faces. So therefore, the probability of getting an even number is 3 over 6, or that is equivalent to 1/2. In experimental probability, how many times did you actually roll the number 1 in the experiment? So tingnan lang natin sa table natin, ilang beses lumabas yung number 1? Okay, so there are 8 times. So ibig sabihin, 8 ang sagot natin dyan. Ngayon, if we're going to have the theoretical probability, so if you roll a number cube or die 36 times, how many times would you expect to roll the number 1? So since ito yung ating faces ng die, kapag nag-roll tayo ng ones, ang lalabas, the probability of getting 1 is 1 over 6. Ang kailangan natin 36 times. Kung sa unang roll natin ay 1 over 6, okay, so pag inulit natin yung ng 36 times, so 1 over 6 multiplied by 36. And we come up with 6. Ibig sabihin, 6 na beses na lalabas yung number 1 if we are going to roll the die 36 times. And lastly, what was the experimental probability of rolling a number greater than 4? So, tingnan natin sa ating table. Number greater than 4 are 5 and 6. So, ilang beses na lumabas? 4 at saka 6 times. So, pag samahin lang natin ito, 4 plus 6 is 10. So, therefore, the probability of getting a number greater than 4 is 10 over 36, or that is 5 over 18. Now, let us see on theoretical probability. What is the theoretical probability of rolling a number greater than 4? So, sa faces ng die, meron tayong 5 and 6. So, dalawa ang number greater than 4. So, therefore, the probability of getting a number greater than 4 is 2 over 36, or that is equivalent to 1/3. And now, it's your turn. Get your paper and pen and do this activity. And that's for today, guys. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and share. Again, this is Teacher Dali na nagsasabing, practice makes perfect. Thanks for watching!